Announcement, in case you need a headset for translation, they are available on that desk, so you can just collect one from over there if you'd like one. It's live streamed. It's streamed by an agency. It's, I mean, for now they've kept all of the recordings. It's good. So, shall I call it? You can. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can start. Which and just this is on. Yeah. Okay. Amy's there. Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any more who are not here who we're expecting? Because I think we should start. No heckling, Michael. All right. Welcome, everybody. Day 2 of Protecting the Past. And it would be a shame not to have a change to the programme, wouldn't it? So in your programme, it says that we are going to have a presentation. The changes are that you won't be hearing from Randa Haidar, who you saw yesterday. We'll have Richard Cutler instead. And from the Cultural Protection Fund, there is only one representative, Amy, but Katrina's here. You're both speaking. Oh, that's new. See, I'm making it up as I go along. So they're both speaking, but only Amy will be on the panel. Is that right? Good. I don't want you to get the impression we don't know what we're doing. So, and what we're going to do is, in the order that it's in your programme, there will be short presentations by each of the funders, and then there'll be a panel session afterwards for questions and answers. So, without further ado, we need the screen down, please. Could we have the screen down? Somebody needs to press a button so the screen can come down. It's happening. Andrea's pointing at me. So, Maya, would you like to come up and give your presentation on the Arcadia Fund? The answer to that is no. She doesn't like giving presentations. No, it will be magnificent.
Oh, God.
And
That's not true. No, it's. I just wonder whether I should sort of gesticulate. Gesticulate. Because I have no PowerPoint, but.
Yes, we're doing some presentations. Yeah, and then we're having the panel. Yeah, and we're just turning the projector on as well, which always helps. And while that's happening, it is worth saying just how important the funders are, because without the funders, we wouldn't be here, both in terms of the project and in terms of the conference. So we will, at the end, obviously thank them. And we're nearly there. It's happening. And I understand you have a maximum of 4 minutes. Is that right? 10. All right. It was a good try.
Okay, well, thank you so very much for inviting me, and thank you, Bob, for your kind words. Well, funders might be important, but the role of funders is to support you, and your work is really our raison d'être. So,
Next.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. The IT is very important too, of course. So, hello. My name is Maya Kominko. I work for Arcadia. I'm the director of cultural programs. And I'm very glad to be here to tell you about how we work, what's important for us. But one thing that I wanted to say is that I'm speaking from Arcadia perspective, and I'm here as much to tell you about our point of view as to learn from you about your points of view. because this should be an iterative process. Only when we learn from each other, we will be able to get better at what we are doing. Arcadia is a private foundation set up by Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin in 2002. We don't fund only cultural heritage, we also fund environment. We used to fund human rights. I'm pleased to say that cultural heritage is still the largest portfolio. Since 2002, Arcadia gave almost 240 million to cultural heritage causes around the globe. But it is also important that we try to learn from each other within Arcadia. So we work closely with our colleagues in environment, and I would like to say that we are learning from them a lot. We support the heritage that is most at risk. So our funders strongly believe that because we are a private foundation, we can take risks that perhaps governmental funders accountable to taxpayers can't take. We mainly support documentation projects, and this is largely because we believe that before you do anything else, you have to know what it is that you are trying to protect. Most of our projects include capacity building, and most of them rely on a partnership between a European or American university or museum and an in-country partner. And this is not to say that the in-country partner is the one learning from the university and museum. That is, we hope they are, but there is as much as the European university or museum can learn from in-country partner as the in-country partner can learn from them. And importantly, we always require open access and long-term preservation of all data. So just to run you, one more thing I should say, we do not accept applications. Most of our projects are very large, in excess of 2 million, and we help to set them up. We're very proud to say that Yemena is one of such projects which we help to initiate. So you can't apply to us, but you can apply to our programs. We used to have 3. As of yesterday, we have 4 grant-giving programs, which is to document languages, to document archives, both pre-industrial and modern archives, an endangered material knowledge program with a wonderfully anthropological name, which offers granted documentation of arts and crafts and traditional skills. So what questions do we ask when people apply to our programs and when we start conversations with potential grantees? First question is, why do you want to do this? And what it is that you want, you should, and you can preserve. Our Endangered Languages Documentation Program is a good example of the variety of answers to that. So we think that you always can preserve a record, but you can't always try to preserve the heritage. There are points where it simply doesn't make sense. So if you work with a community of 10 speakers, it really doesn't, you might ask yourself, does it make sense to revitalize this language, to preserve it? And as heartbreaking as it might seem, the answer sometimes is no, because it's of no benefit to the community. And if they don't want to do this, don't force them. When projects apply to this program, they usually have to specify whether community requested revitalization. What we try to do, we support preparation of revitalization materials, but only when community requests them. So it has to be a dialogue. You can't be in a position of telling the community what it is that they should do or what it is that they should preserve. This is an interesting example, and I'm putting it in because it came up in a conversation yesterday. This is a project that documents a craft of rock-cutting churches, and when we first, in Ethiopia. So this is a wonderful craft that is on a point of dying, and when the project communicated with us for the first time, they told us that it was really sad because the first thing that the workshop asked them was to bring a sledgehammer from Canada. And it wasn't that terrible that the craft was going to die because the people will stop using traditional tools. But you have to ask yourself, do we have right to kind of museumize these people, or should we give them the same rights that we give ourselves and let them move on? And it's sad that the craft, which is really wonderful, is going to die. But after all, we don't build Gothic cathedrals anymore, and perhaps we shouldn't expect that of people in Ethiopia as much as we would like to preserve quirky and exotic. So why do we preserve what we preserve? And I think that the answer, the answers are endless and they would be very diverse. But predominantly from the point of view of Arcadia, we preserve the record, we make it available to the world, and what the world does with this is for them to decide. For us, what matters is to preserve the voices that otherwise possibly would be lost. This is very much a part of our Endangered Languages Archives program, which has preserved 7 million documents that otherwise would not be accessible. This means that the history going forward, the history will be written not only from the perspective of Western archives, but also from the perspective of people whose voices were not heard. One of my favorite projects here are archives in Sikkim, which is a Himalayan kingdom which became part of India in 1975. The history of Sikkim, until recently, was written purely from the perspective of British colonial archives. Once Sikkim archives were digitized, of course, the history has to be rewritten because we can for the first time hear about this history from the point of view of local people. But that said, this was the goal from this project from the very beginning. There were other outcomes which we sometimes didn't expect. For example, the church archives in Colombia, which were digitized through EEP, became a major source of material for the rights of indigenous people to recover their lands. So once you put this online, once you digitize it, once you make it available, really wonderful things start to happen, things that you might not have predicted from the outset. So this is why we always insist on two things. One is open access, but we don't mean open access in a sort of extremist way. Open means as open as possible and as close as necessary. Of course, there are safety reasons. We are not going to ask people to disclose location of all sites. There are cultural sensitivity issues. For example, there are languages that can be spoken and heard only by women. We're not going to insist on making them open access. We just want to hear why they can't be made open access, and one has to be sensible about this. We agreed to login systems which allow to verify that users are bona fide users. But we never agree to paywalls. The access to heritage should be free and should be universal. We also require long-term preservation. I put plus 100 years, but really our terms and conditions stipulate that the materials have to be preserved as long as the institution that has a grant from us exists. Now, this is not an easy thing to do, especially for NGOs, but our advice is always work with partners, avoid commercial solutions. They might last for next 10, 50, 20 years, but they won't last forever. Choose sensible resolution to avoid excessive costs. There is a point where resolution is good enough. And importantly, make sure that the data is discoverable and usable. And I know that I'm running out of time, but just to tell you, we also like people to be pragmatic about this. This is an example of a documentation in Africa that the British Museum took on after the African NGO couldn't keep it online. This is the first project ever where British Museum accepted a digital image as part of their collection. It would take an act of parliament for this image to be destroyed. It's going to last as long as the British Museum lasts, which hopefully is as close to forever as we can get. Now, we had heard criticism, why is this in the British Museum? I mean, of course, Somalia can have a copy. There can be as many copies as you want. This is freely accessible. And of course, there is a colonial history, but think about the alternative. Yes, we can leave it just in Somalia, but the chances are there will be trouble in keeping it online as long as we can do in the British Museum. So pragmatism should be a byword in preservation. But when you talk about open access, do consider the fact that not all communities have internet access. And this was a case of our work in Bhutan, where all materials are open access online, but that meant that everyone except the Bhutanese had access to these materials, which meant that the project had to be creative and create analog solutions to grant access to the community. We also ask projects to make sure that the data is available through mobiles. Important question that we always ask is, what is the impact of your work on the community? And I'm sorry, I know that I am at this point exceeding my time, but this is perhaps important to say. This is a Mandaean community, the last Gnostic community, and it is a community where there is a deadline of their survival. They're going to be gone in 30 years. They existed from the 1st century AD. But the community is very divided. They traditionally lived in Iraq and Iran. They mostly live in diaspora now, and they have very little contact between them. Now, all the separate groups thought that they maintained the one Mandaean tradition. Once the traditions were digitized, they discovered that they actually diverged quite significantly. This was a shock to the community, and the project had to reckon with this. Basically, project had to moderate between different groups. This is not something that we thought that they would need to do, but we have since learned that it is important to ask the questions about the impact. Whatever you do, however light touch you think you are, there will be impact on the community. The very important thing is work with local partners and always be sure that we are on the same page. This is one of our, I know all our projects are our favorite projects, but this one is long-standing favorite project. It's a project, you probably heard about this, about the monks that protect manuscripts from ISIS, which is a rather simplistic way of putting it, but so be it. This is Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, which is a Benedictine outfit from America. And they have a very good way of working, we think. Essentially, they help custodians to digitize the manuscripts, and the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library takes this material on. But the degree of access, well, everything is accessible, but then whether you give rights for publications to others, that depends on the custodians. So they make decisions about if things are possible to publish or not. They still retain a degree of control over these collections. And finally, as we speak about our favorite projects, of course, Arcadia is very proud to support Yemena, and we're very proud to see how Yemena grows. We like our projects to be ambitious. Your work is always important. And I feel that at this point I can stop, because I think you all realize, working with Yemena, what a wonderful initiative it is. And Bob and the team, thank you so very much for your hard work. As I say, we are very proud to support you, and may your work continue for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. And I was going to declare an interest that obviously we're funded by Arcadia, but you know that now, don't you? And therefore, we can move on to the next couple. Who's going to speak first? Amy's going to go first. Because we're also funded by the Cultural Protection Fund. And so one of the things we'll get onto in the panel is the whole way in which funders fund and the leverage and everything else. But Amy, can I introduce Amy Eastwood, who is going to talk on the work of the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund. And I won't, I'll let someone else deal with that.
Oh, yeah.
This one? Next preview. Okay.
Yep.
Light, the red one.
Right.
Light,
Oh, right, yeah, thank you. Okay, hello. As Bob said, my name's Amy Eastwood. I work for the British Council. I'm the Senior Programme Manager for the Cultural Protection Fund. And also here with me today is Katrina McPherson, who's one of our grant managers. So first I'm going to just give you a brief overview of the Cultural Protection Fund, which may be familiar to some of you, but I think it will still be useful. And then Katrina will follow up with a few examples of some of the projects we're funding which involve digital documentation. So, as you may know, we're a £30 million fund with funding over the years 2016 and to 2020. We get our funding for the grants that we award from the UK government's Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. However, the British Council is responsible completely for the delivery of the Cultural Protection Fund, and we also cover all of the costs involved in delivering the fund. We focus on projects which support cultural heritage affected by conflict in the wider MENA region. And I'll show you a slide in a moment with our 12 current target countries on that. We administer what's called ODA, or Official Development Assistance. And it's very important with this ODA funding that we support projects which benefit the beneficiary countries involved. And so technically it should support the economic and social development of these beneficiary countries. So we're very much looking for projects which respond to locally identified development needs. So while we are actually a global fund, so anyone in the world could apply, any organization in the world could apply to the Cultural Protection Fund. It's very important that they're working with partners which are based within our 12 target countries. It's important that they have a strong partnership agreement with these organizations, and we also look for them to provide a statement of local need for the particular project. And I think also just to say, we have, I think, about 50% of our projects to date are being delivered by lead applicant organizations which are based in the UK, but about 30% of our projects are delivered directly by organizations based within the target countries, and the remainder are from organizations in other areas of the world. So these are our 12 target countries. As I said, it's the wider MENA region, so it also includes Afghanistan, Sudan, and Turkey. And I'll just move on, I think. Sorry, I'll go back. I'll say it's important, as I said, that the activity of the project is benefiting one of these countries, but there could be activity taking place outside of a country, for example, training that might be taking place in the UK or elsewhere. We're an outcomes-based fund, which means you could be delivering a wide range of activity types in order to achieve one or more of our 3 outcomes. So we have a required outcome, which is cultural heritage protection, and then also training and capacity building and advocacy and education. And thanks to the really high demand that we've experienced for our funds to date, we're happy to say that most of our projects are able to, are setting out to achieve at least 2, if not 3 of these outcomes. So this slide just shows so if you look at the colors here, the intensity of the color, so the darker the color, the more projects we have taking place in these countries. So at the moment, actually, occupied Palestinian territories is where we have the largest or the highest number of projects. Unfortunately, Syria is the country where we have only 1 project taking place on the ground. However, we do have a really high number of projects working with Syrian refugee communities in Jordan and Lebanon and also Turkey. At the Cultural Protection Fund, we take a very inclusive view of heritage, and so we look not just at sort of high value, high status heritage, but what's valued by the local communities themselves. At the moment, in terms of the types of heritage we're funding, the highest percentage of our funding is going towards built heritage, followed by archaeology and monuments, museums, libraries, and archives, and then ICH, or intangible cultural heritage. However, if you look at the number of projects we're funding, we actually have quite a few ICH projects, and they just tend to be the smaller, sort of lower cost projects. And then finally, I'd just like to touch on the future of the Cultural Protection Fund. So even though we're going till 2020, the current funding allocation is nearly complete. We'll be taking decisions in December for our closing round. However, we're very hopeful for future funding, and the potential is definitely there for extension. So we're working quite closely with our partners at DCMS and also our advisory group to look at potential for the future. We're doing a lot of evaluation work internally to look at the impact of the fund to date and also areas of unmet need, so that we can put together some proposals for any potential future iteration of the fund. So that's all from me just now, and I'll just hand over to Katrina.
Let's move this along. Great, so I'm just going to introduce a few of the projects that the Cultural Protection Fund has funded to date. A considerable number of our funded projects are undertaking digital documentation work to achieve cultural heritage protection. Most of these projects are also providing training in documentation technologies, and some are also using digital documentation to enable communities to better understand their cultural heritage. So from a documentation perspective, we do have some priorities. We look to see that the applicants demonstrate that there is a local demand for the work. So we require a statement of local need from our lead applicants. It should be provided by the local partner. It's important that the records that are produced are deposited locally. So even if they're held elsewhere, we look to see that people from the beneficiary country will be able to access and make use of the records. And as with everything that we fund, demonstrating complementarity with other work to avoid duplication and to make sure that there is compatibility with existing systems, we look to see that that's included in our projects. In terms of sustainability, the technology needs to be appropriate for the target country. We need to ensure that future costs of maintaining the database and upgrading software are taken into account as well. So just moving on to some of our projects that focus on digital documentation. I know that everyone here is familiar with the excellent work, obviously, of the EAMENA project. So I'm going to focus on a few of our other projects here today. So the first one is called Sudan Memory. It's been delivered by King's College London in partnership with the Sudanese Association for Archiving Knowledge, the National Record Office of Sudan, and Africa City of Technology. So this is a 2-year project focusing on protecting a range of heritage material in cultural institutions in Sudan, and it's through digitization. So the project will record a large volume of at-risk content, so it includes photographs, manuscripts, maps, and audiovisual material. Professional cataloguing and digitization services are being installed in various institutions across Sudan, so providing the equipment to scan large-scale maps, documents, printed books, and photographic prints. They're then going to establish a digital archive of the material with offsite, so it'll be maintained by Africa City of Technology, but there'll also be offsite backup established and a full disaster recovery plan for the material. The content's being developed on a wide range of technologies so that it can be disseminated widely. So the material will be shared in cultural institutions such as museums, but it'll also be accessible at home, and it'll be shared in schools and in universities too. And then finally, the project is also training around 200 local staff in digitization, archiving, cataloguing, as well as project management and business management skills. So this is a project from the Virtual Experience Company, which was delivered in partnership with the Ramberg Foundation in Tunisia. So this is one of our small grants under £100,000 and is actually now complete. It used laser scanning, photography and photogrammetry to digitally record a palace in Tunis. So the focus of this project was creating an interactive 3D model, but using it as an educational tool. So they created a 3D reconstruction of the palace, which has been shared online and has also been stored in a digital archive. You can explore the model in real time and access detailed information on the architectural features of the palace. So they've created hotspot content, which provides context to the architectural features, and there's research material embedded in the model as well, with audio narrative and archive material. The primary audience for the model was identified as school children and young people. So the grantee worked closely with local teachers and students and with the Ministry of Education to develop the content. The link to the website is there on the screen, so it includes 5 separate missions for children to explore the palace, kind of answering questions and solving puzzles as they move around. And there's also some educational resources for teachers on there as well. So our third project is entitled Training in Action. This has been delivered by Durham University in partnership with the National Institute of Heritage in Tunisia and the Libyan Department of Antiquities. It's a 2-year project training 40 local staff in documentation techniques, basic preventative conservation and heritage management. So the project is working closely with both heritage agencies, developing a shared protocol for the documentation and recording of archaeology in Libya and Tunisia. They're creating long-term conservation and management plans for architectural sites. And they're training over 40 local heritage professionals. So their training is focused on 3 main areas in this project. They're looking at GIS and survey techniques, site monument and object recording, and also focusing on preventative conservation and heritage management. So they're training in technology such as 3D modelling, using drones, photogrammetry, large-scale 3D modelling. The trainees will then use the skills that they've acquired to catalogue heritage and damage incurred to it. They're creating a national database for both heritage agencies. Priority areas are being developed, and the trainees will record movable heritage in museums and storerooms, as well as recording archaeological sites and monuments. The grantee is now planning to deliver advanced training to a select group of their trainees. So they're focusing on remote sensing and predictive modelling using GIS as a tool for heritage management. And then our final project I just wanted to introduce is being delivered by Inherit, who are part of the York Archaeological Trust in partnership with the American University of Beirut. So this is a small grant again, but this is focusing on the intangible cultural heritage of Bedouins of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. So this project is creating maps of Bedouin pastoral routes in digital form. They're carrying out research and documentation of the mobility routes through site visits, group discussions, and interviews. They're then developing an online open access archive of the cultural heritage, so sharing photographs, audio recordings, video recordings, and text. They're performing a mapping exercise as well, so creating GIS maps of the Bedouin routes. And they're also developing a mobile app which has the aim of connecting Bedouin communities across the region, allowing them to share photos, videos, memories, and information about their past and current way of life. And then finally, they're also creating a virtual exhibition just to share the ICH more widely. So hopefully that gives you an insight into the types of the digital work that we're currently funding. The details of all of our funded projects are on our website, and me and Amy will be happy to answer any questions you have here today. Oops.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Amy and Katrina. You've heard now from 2 different types of funders, as Maya said, private philanthropy and Council Protection Fund, which is a government agency. And we will have questions on the panel, and I've already got 4 that I've thought of. But don't forget the question that Maya raised early on, which was, why are we doing all this? Because I think that's a really good discussion that we could have on the panel. But we now move to something completely different, a new organisation called ALIF, and I'll let France Desmarais describe it. This is its first outing, I believe, the first time it has been spoken about in public. So, over to you, France. And I'll need somebody to find the presentation. He's good.
I brought my phone to time myself. Don't worry, I don't take calls when I'm on the podium.
Alif.
Yeah, Alif. Thank you. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. For those of us that know me, you know I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times in the last 8 years in my previous role at the International Council of Museums, where I was in charge of cultural property protection and the fight against illicit traffic. But I'm very happy to be here among such a distinguished group of colleagues to do my first presentation on ALIF. So yeah, it does feel a bit like my coming out. So I hope you will bear with me, be indulgent. I had no time to do a presentation because this is our first presentation, and you'll see that we've been very busy doing all sorts of important things. So hopefully my PowerPoints will look better in the future. But I want to share the essential information on what ALIF is, what it does, how it works, and how I really hope we can work together and how you can help us help you. This is the only reason why I'm here today. So what is ALIF? I will come to that right after, but why ALIF? ALIF came about when we were in a time of desperate situation where dramatic destruction of cultural heritage was happening at a very large scale in different parts of the world, but mainly in the Sahel and in the Middle East. And since the Second World War, it was the first time that the heritage folks that we are were faced with having to protect cultural heritage in conflict. We were used to preparing for natural disasters. We were doing all sorts of things to protect cultural heritage from different kinds of threat. But this was a new threat. We had been living, we had the privilege of living in fairly peaceful times since the Second World War. So it's been a huge shift and adaptation in our methods and how we work and what we do, how we do it. But then we realized that the mechanism we have to protect cultural heritage were not up to the task, because we needed new legal instruments, which have been developed, some of them, and are being ratified these days. And we needed new financial mechanism and response mechanism to support the professionals on the ground. So this is when I like to see it as the world coming together to say, yeah, we need to do something about this. And you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, but exceptional times also call for exceptional responses and measure. So with the mandate of protecting heritage to build peace, this is a very short history. As a museum professional, I'm used to time being on a longer scale. But this is what happened in this period of time. So faced with the dramatic videos and images of destruction that we were seeing, President François Hollande of France at the time tasked the CEO of the Louvre, Jean-Luc Martinez, to produce a report to say, you know, help us understand how can we better protect cultural heritage in conflict. And this was the November 2015 report with 50 recommendations from the director of the Louvre. And this is interesting that the director of one of the world's largest museums, was tasked with this because there's this understanding that as places of conservation, museums should know about and should play an active role in protecting heritage. Following the report, in which there was one of the 50 recommendations was creating an international fund, France and the Emirates with Abu Dhabi came together and said, we're going to help launch such an initiative, but first let's gather and make sure that the rest of the world agrees with us. And there was the December 2016 Abu Dhabi conference, which of course I attended in my previous capacity. And a couple of months later, there was a launch at the Louvre, a donor conference, if I may say, where countries had a chance to raise their hand and say, yeah, we'll be part of this, and this is how many millions we'll be putting on the table. And this was something new, because there was also some private donors who decided that, you know what, this is a problem that civil society and states need to tackle together, because it's large enough that we need all heads and hands on the table and around the table. So after that, thanks to the support of the Swiss government, ALIPH was created in Geneva, but with a status of an international organization. So it's a very unique model. I said, you know, exceptional times call for exceptional measures. It has the status of an international organization with, you know, diplomatic status and immunities, but it's also a private fund by Swiss law. It's a private foundation by Swiss law. So we have member states, if I may say, in the sense that they're donors and contributors, not in the sense of a traditional international organization, but we also have private donors and experts who are there in their expert capacity because of the work that they've done in the past. That includes Richard Curran from the Smithsonian and Professor Markus Ilgert from Germany. And this quote from Jean-Luc Martinez is very important to me, because it's really at the cornerstone of what we want to do is act. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of meetings, a lot of conferences on this topic, and really there was this feeling that we need to get our means together to make sure that we can support action on the ground. So it was time to stop talking and start acting. So our mission is fairly narrow and broad at the same time. It's about supporting actions on the ground before, during, and after conflict. What is a conflict? That's up to the person who wishes to protect cultural heritage to decide and make the case for it. We're not going to make up a list of countries that are targeted, because we know that we live in an unstable world, and a place not considered a conflict today could suffer from conflict tomorrow. And I really don't want to take this opportunity to mention or surf on a wave, but on Saturday in Paris, we saw that the Arc de Triomphe and the Jeu de Paume were, one was damaged from the inside, the other one was threatened because of protests and unrest. So, you know, violence is something that takes many shapes and form, and we need to make sure that our definition of what a conflict is sufficiently large to encompass the actual needs on the ground. And this is going to be the basis of the work that ALIPH wants to do, is not have a preconceived notion of what cultural heritage is. That's also something that the person requesting funding should make the case for, that this is considered cultural heritage for them in this country, in this region, and this is a conflict or potential or future or post-conflict situation. So this means our action can be very broad. This is not a very appealing slide, but I thought since we're new, you should know that we have a foundation board, which is the members I mentioned. Our vice president is Mohammed Al Mubarak from Abu Dhabi, and it's our previous vice chair was France, a representative of the French government. We have a scientific committee which advises on decision making. Before joining ALIPH as part of the staff, I was a member of the scientific committee. And I'm going to mention that later, but I'm also a member of the advisory board of the British Council Cultural Protection Fund. And we're going to call on you to make sure that you cooperate and you don't duplicate, but this is because funders want to take their responsibilities also to make sure that they coordinate and avoid duplication and put our strengths and our forces together. We're not here to compete. We're here to compete about how we can best protect cultural heritage, and the only way to do this is to do it together. No fund alone has enough funds and means to do this, so we need to work together. Very quickly, since ALIPH was about action and there wasn't a staff in place, we all arrived, all of us, meaning a small team for the time being, on September 1st. So to the day, it's been only 3 months since we've been there, meaning we had to set up everything. The organization did not exist physically, if I may say, setting up the office, getting a new logo, putting up a website, which is still a work in progress, and preparing our first call for proposal. But before that, the board asked the scientific committee last year to start finding and funding projects, to really start acting and intervening. This is about putting our money where our mouth is. So, of course, one of the reasons why ALIPH was created is because we've all been devastated by the destruction of the Mosul Museum. So it made sense to respond to the request of the Iraqis to help them rehabilitate the museum. So right now, and this is also at the core of how ALIPH wants to operate, with consortium, with partners, making sure that nobody is doing this alone, but in partnership. If we, I very much believe in collective intelligence, and collective work usually always produces the best results. So the Smithsonian Institution and the Musée du Louvre are working together in what I call phase 0, the initial phase, where we literally assess, treat the museum as a crime scene, document if this is going to go to International Criminal Court one day, or if people need to be prosecuted. We need to do this very seriously, document the damages, but also document in a way that could be useful, because nobody else is taking care of this and doing it. And then the most important part of our work will be work with the Iraqis to see what they want to do with the museum for the future, what they need, and what we can propose. And then, in 6 months, we will have what we call in French a feuille de route. We will know exactly what the museum wants and needs, and in how many steps we can produce it, so that we can start funding it and also gathering outside support, because we won't be able to do this alone, but we really want to make sure we can help channel the help that the museum is going to receive towards an end goal that we can get everybody on board. And the other main project that ALIPH decided to fund over the summer is the rehabilitation of the tomb of Askia on the request of the Mali government, also because it was one of the reasons why we thought ALIPH should exist when such destruction in the Sahel existed. And we're going to ask Crater to work with the Mali government, and again, because we think that collectively we need partnership on the ground and expertise that is very specific to every project. Very quickly, what our granting scheme is going to be about is twofold. Immediate relief. So something happens where you need a quick infusion of funds. You really need something done to protect a place of conservation very quickly. You can ring us up any day, every day. This is something that's going to be ongoing and open, and we will make sure we've committed to studying it and providing a response within 1 month, because we know that time is of the essence. If this cannot wait for the annual call for proposal, then it should be submitted instantly. Those are going to be smaller projects because, of course, usually immediate response doesn't necessitate millions. So we don't have what we call a large grant or small grant, but the immediate relief as an envelope that is lower, of course, because of the nature of the response we're going to give. And our annual call for proposal is going to have 2 deadlines a year and be fairly classic Why do we do this? Because it's important for transparency. We have public funds, and I think it's important to also have a public call where everybody and anybody can apply. And in this public call, there will not be minimum or maximum amount. The idea, and I think this was very courageous on the part of our board to decide to go ahead with this, that we're going to listen to what the field wants and what the field needs. And it's going to be up to you to tell us how much you need to do exactly what and where. And this is the gamble we're taking. I don't think you're used to that. You're used to, you know, being put in more constraints when it comes to application. There won't be many. You'll just have to make the case for what is needed, and we will study it with our scientific committee based on that. I'm done. So I just want you to get ready because the website will be live, inshallah, on January 15th, and you will have 2 months to apply maximum. So we're going to start fairly soon. You can email me, and as soon as it's ready, we'll send it to you. Start circulating what type of call for proposal we're going to be requesting. But again, the guidelines are going to be fairly wide and open, but I know people need some kind of guidance, so we've prepared a couple of pages to help you prepare an application. And as I said, the urgent relief has already started, actually. We are looking at how we can support something in Libya, something in Afghanistan. We've already started doing immediate relief for the museum, because it doesn't make sense to rehabilitate the Mosul Museum if we're not going to take care immediately of its collection that needs rehousing right now. So we've already just yesterday got the green light that we can do this for the museum. So I'm happy. I hope we're going to have questions where I can expand on that. I was happy to hear about what you do in documentation, because one of my main concern is going to be avoid duplication. You heard my question and comment yesterday. Make sure that we work on compatible tools, that we don't overlap, and that we cooperate and coordinate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. There will be a very, very long queue from here to Geneva, I'm sure of it. And the working together, I think that's something we really do have to emphasize. And it is, I know time is pressing, but it is amazingly rewarding and heartwarming to think of the international collaboration that's created that fund. As a heritage professional or archaeologist, or however you want to describe me, I have spent my life begging for more funds to do what we're passionate about, and it's great to hear that response, so thank you. Now, without further ado, I shall introduce Richard Cutler, who is going to talk to us on the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism fund, money, who knows? We'll find out. All yours. You've got about 2 minutes.
I'll see what I can do.
Next preview.
Okay, thank you. My name is Richard Cutler. I'm based with the Department of Culture and Heritage in Abu Dhabi. I'd like to thank the organisers for organising this very important conference, and also for asking me to speak. I've been asked to talk about the work of the Department of Culture and Tourism. What I'd just like to say first, really, we're not actually a grant funding body. We're the government body that's responsible for the protection, for the maintenance and the promotion of cultural heritage, and also tourism within Abu Dhabi. So we don't actually have kind of yearly calls for funding and this kind of thing, but I will stress that we do work very closely together with international organisations such as the Global Heritage Fund. We organise a number of international conferences, such as the conference that France mentioned earlier, the one we had in December 2016. about cultural protection in conflict. Okay, so I'm talking fairly specifically about the work of the Historic Environment Department. We have a team of 33 heritage professionals, which is divided into 7 sections, which covers archaeology, historic buildings, World Heritage Site management, and conservation. So this is just covers briefly our activities. I'm not going to go through them all, but it's focused on the protection of heritage within Abu Dhabi, and there's a number of things here that I think are quite important as well, which are disseminating the research, practice, outreach, education, and so on. But also something else which I'm going to mention shortly, which is the development of the database and inventory in Abu Dhabi. When I was putting this together, it was actually quite difficult to try and condense down all of the projects that we're running at the moment into a few slides and into 2 minutes, as Bob mentioned. But these are just oops, sorry, I'm just going to go backwards. These are just a few of the projects. This is 3D modelling, so we're doing laser scanning at a camel kill site. This is a site that dates to around about 6,000 years ago, and there's a number of articulated camels that we found in the desert. They're associated with flint tools, and it's a large Neolithic camel kill site. We're undertaking research excavations, both Bronze Age excavations on Bronze Age sites on the island of Sabanias, and also on the Christian Church monastery that's there, the 7th century Church of the East monastery. This is another research excavation here. That's Abdullah Al-Khabi excavating. This is actually a Neolithic site that dates to around somewhere between 7,500 and 8,000 years ago with stone-built architecture. We undertake remote sensing here, undertaking GPR. Again, we're not the intangible heritage section, but we do undertake some intangible heritage work, like interviews and so on. Surveys and excavation, and our remit also includes paleontology. So we have formations of Miocene rocks dating to around about 8 to about 6 million years ago. We're also involved in capital projects, so we work very closely with our projects department, who are planning the restoration, renovation of some of the forts, etc., within Abu Dhabi, and also building new. This is the Katara Art Centre in Al Ain Oasis, where we excavated down a total of 5 metres here through sediments within the oasis, and this is in advance of the Katara Art Centre. I think Randa yesterday mentioned about Qasr Al Husn, and we've actually got the opening of Qasr Al Husn on Friday if anybody's in Abu Dhabi. It'll be a big opening because it's nearly 2 years work of restoration of the fort there as well. So our remit also includes the development of international courses. Earlier this year we had the international course on the conservation of earthen architecture together with the Global Heritage Fund. We undertake workshops, training, and also we had the conference, archaeology conference in Al Ain in March earlier this year. And also I mentioned about education, publication and presentation. That's the output is very, very important to us, that we have a high publication output as well. And this is the Louvre here, Louvre Abu Dhabi, actually with material. This pot comes from Marawa Island, one of the sites we showed you being excavated earlier. So basically our mandate comes from the law number 4 of 2016, which is a very strong law for the preservation and protection of cultural heritage within Abu Dhabi Emirate. And part of the law calls for the development of a historic environment record, an inventory of all known sites within Abu Dhabi, so that we can manage the cultural heritage within the Emirate. Just to give you an idea of the scale of what we're dealing with, here I've just put down some facts and figures and a quick audit. We work very closely together with the Environment Department and also the Planning Department, which is called the DPM, Department of Planning and Municipalities. And they're kind of like a central hub which then asks for no objection certificates from all of the other government bodies, so from the Environment Department and so on. And the number of responses for 2017 that we provided to the DPM, that's nearly 12,000 responses, and that's in 1 year. And you can already see within the first 2 quarters of this year from NOCs we're going to further that. We're going to be providing more responses. And so, again, it's the issue about trying to balance development, and so part of the reason for the development of the HER in Abu Dhabi is so that we can actually manage the development within the country and make informed decisions about what needs to happen. So at the moment, our database it's ArcGIS. It's access based that we pull into ArcGIS. So it's kind of we have a system at the moment, but it's not absolutely ideal. It's not relational. It's not searchable in the way that we would like to search it. So just looking at some of the key things behind the development of databases and inventories, I've put what I think are the 3 core things that we need to know. The location, we need to know where it is, the condition of it, what's it like now, and what are the threats that it's under. If we can capture that, then we can begin to start actually managing that heritage resource. So these are some key concepts behind the development of a historic environment record. And I'd like to say that a historic environment record is not simply an inventory of sites. It's much, much more than that. It's actually, it involves recording events, it involves recording things that have happened, areas that have happened. It's a geospatial database of both events and sites, but also resources that I'll come to very shortly. So, heritage areas, sites, physical spaces here. I mentioned about the fossil sites, archaeological sites, historic buildings, and so on. Then we have events, which are actions, things like conservation work being taken place, excavations, marine survey, geophysical survey as well. So these are events that can be mapped geospatially, and it's important to know when and where these things have taken place. But also added to that, resources including publication reports, grey literature, digital archives, maps and plans, and so on. But the importance with all of these things is that they're relational, that they're searchable, that when we search for a site, we also get all of the other information there, that we get the events that have happened that are associated, we understand the conservation, and also all of the planning applications as well that are associated together with this. And this is Al Ain Oasis, which is the World Heritage Site on the eastern side, within the eastern region of Abu Dhabi. And this actually presents a number of issues for us that I'm sure is experienced globally in terms of population rise, pressure on sites, development pressures on the site. And this again is divided into 4 separate zones, core zones, and then zones coming out from that A, B, C, and D. So the system that we're developing, it's a piece of bespoke software. There was mention before about open source software, but for reasons we don't use open source software within the Department of Culture and Tourism, and that's a decision that's been taken by the IT department for that. So there's certain arguments about whether open source software is the best way forward, and in some instances I'm sure it is. Also whether bespoke software is the way forward. But I think, you know, whichever one you prefer to go for, solution that you go for, the key is to make sure that it's sustainable within the future. So if that open source software stops being supported by the community, it's in a logical, it's the data standards and the metadata and the way in which the data is stored is in a logical way that it can be then migrated into future systems. This is really the key behind it. So the ADHER it will be designed to pull together information from a wide variety of sources. So we commenced the project in January this year. We went through a whole series of situation assessments, the situation within the Department of Culture. We talked to other stakeholders. We want the tourism sector to be able to access this as well. At the moment, we're getting lots of requests about sites. What we want to happen is that the tourism sector or publications, that they can immediately access this information. They can download photographs straight away. They can download, if you like, a single point of truth, maybe 500 words about a site. If they're developing publications or they're developing, you know, default leaflets or information signboards for sites, they've got the access to this information. We put together a requirements report, data model reports, and so on. We've liaised with our partners within the Environment Department in terms of what their needs and requirements are, and also the Department of Planning and Municipalities, because we want them to have the information as well, so that they can make informed decisions about how development should happen. And they can make those decisions before they even come to us. They can look at areas and say, what do we need to avoid? How can we do development in a sustainable way? So it's being developed in what's called an agile. They're agile sprints. So each sprint is a development of the software. There's 8 sprints altogether. We're now at the stage of where sprint 2 has been completed. So it's becoming functional. There's parts of the software that are not functional, but the added advantage of developing in sprints is that you don't get a software delivery right at the end of the project and suddenly you find there's something missing or this is not doing the work that you need to do. So at each stage, because it's available on a web browser, the whole of the department is able to look at it, evaluate it, say what it's doing, what things are missing, and then we keep feeding back and those changes are made at each sprint. So the changes from sprint 2 will be made in sprint 3, and the completion of all our 8 sprints will be done by September this year. But that actually is just the start of it, because at that point then we've got huge amounts of data that's been collected over 25 years by various organisations. As you can imagine, it's stored without data standards in lots of different ways. So we've then got a large project on data enhancement and putting all of this data into the system. This is just a very, very quick screenshot. We've gone through various designs, layouts, how we use real estate on the page and all the rest of it. So really, that's just a very quick overview of the work of the department and what we're doing at the moment. I think again as well, I'll just go back to the point. This is one very small part of it. Putting points on the map is one small part of it. What this does in the future is enable us to move forward from this. It enables us to maybe look at landscapes in a more holistic manner, so we can think about things like historic landscape characterisation. We can think about things like using heat maps, risk mapping and things like this, because actually putting dots on the map takes a very, very long time, and through things like historic landscape characterisation, we're able to manage the landscape in a much more holistic manner. We're able to look and compare then with developments, pressures and so on, and how we respond to it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Can you take a seat and then we can get the thing together? Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much, Richard. And I'm going to ask all the speakers if you can come up and have a seat. But what Richard has done is remind us of the question at the beginning, which is why are we doing this? It is about protection, and the theme of the whole conference is about the digital preservation. And most importantly, two words he used, which were that we can make informed decisions. We now have some time for a panel discussion. We may eat into a little bit of coffee time, because I'm sure you have many, many questions for all our speakers. And I, having heard the talks, I'm going to move to the other microphone here. Is this on? Hello, is this working? How do we turn that? Just right now. Press your thing. Oh, wait, and hold it there. Yeah, there we go. Can we hear me? Yeah. It's mainly for the translations, which is why we have to use the microphones. I have at least 7 questions, but I'm not going to ask them because you've heard enough of me. Questions from the floor for any of the speakers in any order. Have we got any? I could sit down, I suppose.
Yes, this is Iman Asi. I'm working at Dubai Municipality, actually. But I'm originally in Palestine. I work also on a lot of projects funded by international donors, especially in the time of Oslo Accord. And I have worked in many projects that funded by different donors, like the archive, the Palestinian archive. Thanks a lot because all of you are international donors. You touch on a very sensitive issues for donors to give money for countries or state. My question is actually coming from my experience, my personal experience. For you, which is better, to fund through NGOs or through state? I mean, because in Palestine we have different channels. It's either through the Palestinian state or NGOs. And what are the difference? Because usually, I mean, I'm not really criticizing you, but usually the donors have their agenda, and the local community and the people who are getting the fund has their agenda. Do you find sometimes conflicts between these two agendas? I don't know. For me, I mean, I found some conflicts in Palestine when it comes to Hamas. I mean, some donors, they said, no, we don't want to give to Hamas. I mean, it's not Hamas, it's the people who are benefiting it. So how far you can go with this? I really like what you comment on coordination and to avoid the duplication, because this is the case was in Palestine. There is a lot of duplication in many projects, especially because it goes through NGOs. There is no public policy for channeling this fund. And my last comment was on the administrative fees. The administrative fees is really too much. I mean, it's like, and the conditions, I think it's 12% to 20%, the administrative fees. And if you want to buy like a car, it has to be from the donors. If you want to bring an international consultant, it has to be from the... So, I mean, there are certain conditions that the effectiveness of the money, it could be much better if you think about, because I really like the mechanism, what kind of mechanism you should really reconsider in the future. And my last, actually, I remember it's the impact. did you really try to find some impact assessments for your projects? I mean, this is really interesting. How much the local community has really benefited from your project. And thanks a lot. It's true.
Thank you. Some very interesting comments and questions. Who wants to answer the question of NGOs or governments? Amy, you look poised.
Hello, thank you for the question. I would say we don't have a policy of working with a certain type of organization, but probably in our experience, it's easier and more practical to work with NGOs and different similar types of organizations. I think they tend to have the experience of making applications and the connections, I suppose, to the community as well. So for us, that's been easier.
Yeah, go on. You want to comment?
Okay, so I mean, it's a little. So Arcadia, as I said, is a private funder, and we, as long as we are convinced that these are the best people for the job, we will basically go with whoever is the best and most convincing. We really don't have many rules. We are, you know, this is the advantage of working with private philanthropy. We do require hard proofs that these are the people who have access to heritage, who have the local credibility, and this is completely. This is not in terms of MENA region or Palestine, but generally we find that there is, especially where we work with minorities, working with government can be problematic. So you know, and sometimes it's a balancing act. So perhaps there is, which you have to also factor in. So maybe the most stable institution in the region is the government or governmental agency, but this is not the institution that the community is going to trust. And sometimes we try to redress it if we think that there is a chance, but sometimes we find it easier to talk to the community and say, okay, so who is the partner that you would be prepared to work with?
Very good answer.
As the new kid on the block, I'm full of good intentions and ambitions, and I think we can and should do things differently. So take what I say with a grain of salt, meaning that this is the aim and this is the desire, and next year I can come back and tell you if we've succeeded in this. But I think my long experience from being on the other side gives me a perspective of, if I'm the donor, then I don't want to expect unrealistic things from the person or the institution we're funding. So I'm very careful with that. When you talked about administration, I forgot to mention that we're going to go for 10% maximum overheads. So we're not going to be in the business of funding the existence of institution. We're going to be in the business of funding actions on the ground and work. And for this, because you asked about agendas, we're going to try to have one agenda, and it's the cultural property protection agenda. So whoever can better serve that agenda is going to be the partners we're going to try to work with. But you do raise, you hit the nail on the head, you raise the conundrum of civil society, NGO, and government support. Ideally, if we fund an NGO to do a work, it's a work that is accepted and welcomed by the community, as you mentioned, but it should also be welcomed and, if not at the worst, tolerated by public powers. It's really important that whatever we do is not seen as intervening against the will of nations, because if we don't, you know, respect some kind of will and desire of nation state, where are we going? So we're going to try to ideally make sure that the cultural heritage protection is something that is welcomed by a government, and then see who is best placed to implement this work that needs to be done. And usually this can be easily accepted by government if they feel that they're not the best placed. But we need to involve them every step of the way. If we want this to be sustainable, they need to support it. So ideally, I would say, you know, if NGOs can do concrete things on the ground, they're going to be privileged, but it's really important that they communicate and coordinate and try to involve local powers if possible.
That's great. Oh yeah, Amy wants to add something.
I just wanted to say, likewise, we do very much take a collaborative approach. And when you mentioned NGOs, I was sort of focusing on that. But we're very happy to have, we have several projects which have government departments as partners. It's just in our experience as the lead applicant organization, it's been more practical. Yeah.
And it seems to me that the overall approach is depends on the NGO, depends on the government, but it's down to what the project is going to deliver. You've also raised, and France mentioned overhead, so let's not discuss that, but you raised impact. How do you measure impact? And I think Amy might comment on that, because the Cultural Protection Fund has an evaluation process, which is very useful. So do you want to talk about evaluation?
Yes, so we have developed an evaluation process. So when a grant is awarded, we sit down with the grantee and develop an evaluation plan for the project, and that will be based on the objectives that they have set out for the project and the various types of indicators and evidence that they plan to collect along the course of the project. And then we, our team based in the UK and also in our country offices, we work with them throughout the project to sort of monitor how they're progressing against that. And then it's a requirement at the end of the project that they deliver an evaluation plan, and they have to set aside a certain amount of the budget in order to produce that. And that's a really useful tool for them, learning for future projects, but also for us in order to measure the impact of the fund and to look at areas that haven't worked and areas of unmet need so that we can plan for the future.
So we ask for impact as a part of the proposal. So, you know, our proposals are structured. I mean, this is bog standard for the industry, I believe. We pay grants in annual installments, and the proposal is structured to stipulate the outcomes for every year. But we also ask for impact. So, and this is to say that, you know, well, there is a desired impact at the beginning, but of course this impact can change. And the important part of our reporting is asking, what have you learned from the project? You know, what, not only, well, we're just probably going beyond the impact, but this is to say that the impact is not only in the outcomes, but also in the process, because there is a lot of learning. You know, most of the things that you are all doing are new, and it's not. And you know, we might set up with one process, one action plan, but this has to be tweaked and changed during the work. And what we learned to see as very important is this learning process as a large part of the impact, because this informs future work on heritage.
Thank you. George, you've got the microphone, so I presume you're about to ask a question.
Thank you, yes. Well, thank you very much for those wonderful presentations and so many fascinating projects in different countries in the region and around the world. And I very much appreciated that all of the three donor organizations mentioned the importance of collaborating with local organizations. But I couldn't help notice that most of the projects mentioned have as the lead partner a Western institution, whether it's a university or a museum from Europe or the US. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the critique that structure of funding perpetuates a certain supremacy of Western institutions over local ones. So my question is, and I'm sure that there are some examples that will detract from this overall trend, but how can we shift the paradigm so that in general, the lead organization in receiving funding and applying for funding is the local one, supported by, in a secondary role, the Western institution, and therefore try and empower local institutions in a more sustainable way. Thank you.
Wow, who wants to comment on that first?
So, as I say, that we try to, for us, the approach is really pragmatic. And pragmatically speaking, at this point of time, the institutions in Europe and America are better placed to do part of what is important for us. That is to say, long-term preservation. If we ever are in a discussion with an organization outside Europe and America that can provide credible guarantees, then absolutely they can be the lead grantee. It's only that so far we haven't come across an organization like that. But what you say, I mean, it's again, we would like to move away from this being us versus them. Most of the projects we have are in a partnership. We talk to both sides. It's just that in formal terms, in practical terms, someone has to sign the piece of paper. But it's really, as I hope I made it clear in the conversation, we never believe that it's the Western, sorry for lack of better term, a Western institution that teaches the local partner, because in most cases, frankly, it was the European institution that had a lot to learn from the local partner, because it is the local partner that knows the heritage. And I think that's, it's not a criticism of your question, but I think that there is a danger in perceiving, we are all in this together, and we should move to approaching this as this is a community of heritage preservation, this is a community of knowledge, this is a community of history preservation, whatever you call it. It's not the the European institution West versus non-European. We should all, both people who ask the question that you very rightly ask, and both people who fund and work in the heritage should perhaps move away from this division.
Amy, do you want to say?
Sure. Just to add to that, I would say when we first launched the Cultural Protection Fund, it was very much a sort of UK news, and the sort of expressions of interest that we received at the beginning were very much coming from UK organisations. However, just over the past 2.5 years, the number of expressions of interest that we've started to receive from within those 12 countries that we're focusing on at the moment has just skyrocketed. And we are now in a position where 30% of the projects that we fund are actually being delivered directly by organizations in the countries. And I hope that if we do receive further funding in the future, that number will really grow. And also, I think all the partners that are involved, and even the ones that are led by Western organizations, have a really significant role to play, and in some cases are more leading the projects, and it's just easier administratively and financially if the funding goes to a different organization in some cases, depending on the sort of financial setup within that country.
Thank you. And as somebody who is gamekeeper turned poacher, because I used to be a grant giver for the Heritage Lottery Fund, it is about the communities and the bottom up, and it doesn't matter whether they come from Cornwall or Palestine or wherever else, it's about those communities. And I think, as Amy's just said, it's finding the appropriate method to deliver that project, and that's maybe the way we should view it. Francis.
Yeah. I'll be the pragmatic Canadian that I am here, and I'll offer a very pragmatic response to a political question, of course, but it all comes down to reality. And right now, I'm trying to help regions of the world where I cannot physically wire money. I cannot physically transfer funds everywhere or anywhere to anyone. There needs to be, oversight, accountability at a minimum, although ALIPH has decided, to keep bureaucracy at the very minimum, but if there's public funds involved, there needs to be accountability and responsibility. This is really important. So we're trying to be creative in seeing how we can deliver those results on the ground, involving the community, and foregoing the administration reservations that we could have. We're working in countries, with endemic corruption in certain cases, and sometimes it's the governments who tell us, you know, find a way to get this done. Don't necessarily wire the money to us. We just need it to happen and see the light. And sometimes there's an acknowledgement from the local government that they know that, you know, this is not necessarily the best way, transferring the money directly in the country, and we're trying to find ways. So there's creative ways in Iraq, for example, not to name it, we've been able to, but no, this is also about involving it's not about wiring money, it's about transferring the knowledge and working with them. They're the ones, you know, teaching us, and we're only supporting them in doing their work. If you need something to, you know, close the hole on the roof of the Mosul Museum, which was done yesterday, thanks to just a little bit of fund, was done locally by the people in charge at the State Board of Antiquities, but with support from the Smithsonian Institution, and will be done with support from ALIPH. So in Nimrud, I know that you know, they worked from a base in Erbil, and it was the Iraqis who would go back and forth and be supported. So we're trying to find creative ways of working together. You're absolutely right. It's not about us and them. And this has been bothering me for a while because when I was working on similar issues, it's about shared heritage. People talk about shared heritage when there's a shared responsibility. And we're told it's a shared responsibility, the world needs to help do this, but there's no shared ownership. The ownership is national, legally. It's their heritage legally. So we agree that it's a shared history and we need to share the responsibility, but we need to make sure we don't do that divide of us and them, and that we are all in this together to make sure that the end result sees the day. So this is just the approach, but I'm glad you raised this question. And the last thing I'm going to say, if you have a list of local NGOs able to restore buildings, please send them to me. I'm dying to get my hands on really local actors who are going to be willing and able and available to deliver.
Okay. I think that's a really, really good question, actually. It's quite a poignant question. I think it's a difficult one to answer, but I think it's a situation that does need resolution, and it certainly is the way forward, because again, it's local communities that care for these monuments. They're the ones that are going to be responsible for them. So to some extent, maybe it's identifying local stakeholders, as France is saying. Maybe it's through the development of conferences directly with those stakeholders as well, bringing them in the first instance. And obviously, you want stakeholders that have you can recognise their ability to deliver within that as well. So I think it's a great question, actually, and one that does need we do need to move forward in that direction, absolutely.
And I know we're being broadcast, but there will be answers that we could give. I was going to give an anecdote, but I can't do it in public, so have a chat to me over coffee.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question on the dialogue between funders and project leaders, because very often we find ourselves with guidelines, priorities, and specifications that are already set and that are not necessarily in line with what we see in our field work. And it's sometimes very difficult to discuss priorities with funders. Take a country like Iraq, for example, we see that a lot of the funding is directed towards religious minorities and their heritage. And we found ourselves in a situation where, I mean, if I do a 3D scan of a church, I'm more likely to get funding than if I do a 3D scan of a mosque. So should I scan as many churches as I can to get funding, or should I try and discuss with funders to shift priorities and have a more balanced approach to how communities get supported? And then it's a very, very large debate that goes well beyond what we do at Econem, but it's a real question that we face with countries like Iraq or Syria in other respects. So it's really, I would like to have your views on this.
Anybody wish to comment on the priorities? Very important issue in terms of how priorities are set. I could see why panel members might not want to do
I mean, I'm not going to answer this question because I can't, because we develop our projects and you can't apply to our to Arcadia, and therefore our projects are developed in a dialogue, and we never set the priorities. We basically try to identify the best partner to do the project, but we listen to them. And the other thing is, if we are convinced, they do need to convince us. It's not that they tell us what they're going to do and we necessarily always agree, as Bob well knows. Usually it is a process of discussion. So we listen, but we do need to hear good arguments. But my advice is that you should not compromise. It's not funders' place to commission projects, because you are the ones who know what happens on the ground and what is needed on the ground. And you would be shooting, as funders, you would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we say, well, on the basis of our general knowledge of the field, this is what we should do, where in reality our knowledge is by its very nature limited because we are not on the ground. So I would say always engage in a discussion, and I'm sure that there is a way of doing that.
On behalf of Yeah, no, I wasn't sure if I completely understood the question, but in terms of funders' priorities, I mean, for us, I guess it's coming down to the type of funding that we're delivering, which we're offering, that official development assistance. So for us, the key priority is the benefit, for that country, and seeing the evidence that there's the local need. So what does that local need come from? It could take many different forms. It could be from the local community, but it could also say it fits in with a wider government strategy. So I guess we're quite flexible in how we interpret that, but we definitely need to see that it's driven locally.
But it does remind me of times at HLF where, and if you look on the Heritage Lottery Fund, things of what they won't fund, and they won't fund something that's either promoting religion and politics. And that's maybe something that actually funders do bear in mind. They may not be explicit about it, but it has to show balance and fairness, and that's the key thing. Anybody else want to comment? Another question quickly, because time is running. Michael.
Can I have a quick question about economic sustainability? One of the contradictions that we're facing in projects in Sudan is that digital technology needs to be maintained in the country where it's actually being preserved. To do that, the people who maintain it need to have some kind of income, and to do that, they have to be able to sell the digital recordings they have, or make some commercial benefit from it. And there's an implicit contradiction from your requirement that it should be no pay for access, and the desires of the institutions who are keeping and looking after this digital technology, because actually digital technology doesn't last unless someone on the ground is actually looking after it, because as you know, basically unless someone's keeping buying new hard drives, it'll just evaporate. So basically, like your hotel key card, unless it's recharged regularly, the whole thing just disappears. And somehow, how are you going to create that economy locally? And just on top of that, talking about local NGOs and local governments, the local government in Sudan, the only income the staff have for the museum is from working for international agencies. So the local staff don't get paid or get paid nothing. And the only money they have is from working for the international agencies such as yourselves. And that is not sustainable. But if the actual local institutions in the countries actually had an economy from their culture, and particularly their digital culture, which is available internationally, globally, which could bring finance into these institutions, somehow there's an implicit contradiction in your policies. Sorry.
Yes, but the fundamental question is a good one, which is how do you make it sustainable?
For us, yes, economic sustainability is very important, and we don't have a policy which says you must not profit from what you've created with our funds. I mean, if you took the example of an exhibition that was being created, we would want to see that there was some free public access to the exhibition during the duration of the project that we're funding. However, we've negotiated, depending on the local context and what is usual, we've negotiated that you could do this bit of it could be free for this period of time, but there could be a reasonable cost or a reasonable charge for seeing the exhibition at a different time. So we're very much, supportive of people being able to, sustain their work. For example, the Turquoise Mountain Trust project, they're gaining skills in marketing the work and the handicrafts that they've created. So we're very much supportive of that.
Can I just say that, with all due respect, I don't think that this is a model that is going to work, because this is a model, charging for access is a model, economic model, that most of, again, for lack of a better word, Western institutions are moving away from, because it simply doesn't work. There is ample evidence, and we have made few test cases where we agreed to an embargo of 5 years, during which the projects could charge for access. It never worked, basically. But what it does, it means that this heritage that you digitize is not accessible to everyone. There will be people who can't afford accessing their own heritage, and this is emphatically what we don't want to happen. There are, however, other ways of thinking about this, and what we have always found is that if our projects make their materials openly accessible, there are then ways of using the platform, digital platforms, for making funds in other ways, for applying for other funding, because other funders can see what it is that the institution has. But also for, we would never prohibit anyone from selling large-scale prints or whatever it is that they want to produce, and then it is, to us, it seems it's a better model. Certainly from our experience, it's a model that worked better for the partners that we worked with. So I'll be very careful and investing in a model where you charge for access, because this model in itself is rather expensive to keep, and it is unlikely to produce revenue that will make this sustainable.
I'd agree with that. Actually, the selling data is not a sustainable model, but it does need to be sustainable. You're absolutely correct. If we look at archaeological sites, heritage sites, there's very, very few of those that actually make money and a profit out of the gate when you're going into that. Where the actual income comes from is all the small shops around there, the tour guides, the restaurants, the hotels, the flights, the tour operators, and so on. And this is the real value, and this is where the sustainable side of it should actually come from.
Sorry, just use the mic, Mike, because you haven't got one, and then just for the translation. And then we'll have one question. This will be the last question.
Sorry, I was just saying the problem is that you're correct, and I'm not saying in any way what you're saying is wrong. What I'm trying to say is, how do you persuade the government that the sustainability on the grassroots level, which is where the problem is, because basically the governments we work with don't invest in their cultural heritage organisations at all. I mean, zero, and possibly negative zero. So the question is, how do you actually, if they can't see any benefit from it, how can you encourage them to see it as a benefit? And that is the question that I'm really trying to ask.
And I don't think we'll answer it this morning. But so one final question from Amin, and then we'll go to the conference announcement, and then you can get your coffee.
ممكن ملاحظة صغيرة بالنسبة للاستدامة في هذا. ممكن ملاحظة صغيرة بالنسبة للاستدامة في هذا الموضوع، ودائما إشراك المجتمع المحلي في المشاريع التي تتم في المواقع التراثية. عادة لما يكون أهل المنطقة نفسهم مشركين في المشروع الذي يتم تمويله واستثماره، أعتقد بيتم تحقيق نوع من الاستدامة في هذا المجال. بالنسبة لمداخلتي فيما يخص إعداد التقارير اللازمة لجلب المستثمرين والداعمين للمشاريع في المناطق، خاصة المناطق اللي معرضة للنزاع، شو في إمكانية كمانحين من تدريب وتأهيل العاملين في القطاع الحكومي أو الخاص لكيفية إعداد التقارير لرفعها للجهات المانحة ليتم يعني تسهيل العمل في إعداد التقارير. شكرا.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much. You also touched a very good point yesterday. I'm grateful that you're here. It's exactly what you said. Why do foreign NGOs get funded more? Because they have the know-how of preparing project proposal. I mean, this is something the CPF has seen in a region. I remember being at a meeting and saying, why is this country getting so many projects funded when we know that there are more needs elsewhere? Well, because this country has know-how, and they proposed, much more. So you're right. We need to find a way. This is something we're trying to address in making it as accessible and as easy as possible to apply, knowing that on my slide I mentioned that there would be an iterative process. We need to accept that the proposal that a local partner would put in. But you're right, we also need to find a way to make sure we build capacity in requesting funds and in reporting to funders about this, because otherwise we'll be stuck in this vicious circle.
Anybody else want to comment? Amy?
With that grant amount, that's under the £100,000 mark. And we also offer what do we mean by the project budget and what do we mean by this document. And so I hope that in the future, if we do get more funding, we can continue on this path and try to dedicate more resource to it.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I'm going to have to draw this to a close, but it has been a fascinating morning, and I'm sure more discussions can go on in private that aren't broadcast. And we've had a really good demonstration of how successful funding can come from being tapped on the shoulder by Maya saying, will you do this, to the government way of, and the CPF model, which is fantastic, and then the ALIF model, which is emergency and an annual call. Just before we started, France and I were chatting, and if I could sum it up, it's not how much you have, it's what you do with it. And that's what I take away from today, so thank you all. And before we go to the conference, oh yes, a quick advert. As if the queue from here to Geneva isn't going to be long enough, there are these outside somewhere. Where are they? Somewhere outside, so do pick them up. But can we thank our speakers and panel for a very stimulating morning. Thank you very much. Thank you. And the conference announcement is about to be made by Nada from the Global Heritage Fund. Do you need a microphone? Or are you going to go on there? Fantastic. And then you can have coffee.
It's a great pleasure to announce at this conference that Global Heritage Fund, in partnership with the Kaplan Fund, will be launching an award scheme to pump prime documentation projects to be carried out by heritage experts trained through the program Training in Endangered Archaeology Methodology, carried out by EMINA project. EMINA, funded by Arcadia Fund and the Cultural Protection Fund, has been able to develop a methodology for protecting endangered cultural heritage through documenting and monitoring across the Middle East and North Africa. The project has also been training about 170 trainees from 9 countries in this region through CPF award. Global Heritage Fund works to empower communities through heritage preservation and partnerships. One of the main objectives of our work is to ensure the preservation of cultural heritage in developing countries through community involvement. As a partner organization of Protecting the Past Conference, we would like to support the documentation work of EMINA trainees in the MENA region to complete their projects and prioritize heritage sites for preservation. The award will cover a maximum of 3 grants, each in the range of $5,000 to $10,000. Grants may be used to cover project costs such as the purchase of equipment, satellite imagery, online hosting space, travel and transportation for on-site condition assessment, staff time, and other costs. The full terms of the grants will be disclosed in February 2019, when the call for application will be officially opened and advertised on the Protecting the Past website, as well as on the EMENA and GHF websites and social media. With a deadline set for mid-March 2019, the applications will be evaluated by an award committee set up by GHF and EMENA, which will include a panel of technical experts from various partner organizations and funders. We anticipate that awardees will be announced in April and be expected to present on the early results of their projects at the next Protecting the Past conference, which will be held around this time next year. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please approach me, Andrea, or Bijan.
And, I mean, that is fantastic news, thank you. And thank you to the Global Heritage Fund. And it is an example of how funders working together the sum can be greater than the individual parts. So that is fantastic, so keep an eye on that. And thank you again, it's coffee time. How long? 5 minutes. I reckon we should take 15 minutes for coffee, yeah? Try and be back in here. I've taken my watch off. What time is it? So back here at 4:15.